You can have a seat. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for making your way back. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All right, we're ready to get started with our first witness.
The state will be calling Charles Cummings.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Cummings, come over here.
Your Honor, good morning. May it please the court, Mr. Escobar, Mr. Michaels, Mr. Funderburg, Ms. Flores, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning. Mr. Cummings, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Mr. Cummings, I'm going to ask that you speak loudly and clearly into that microphone, please. And if you would, please, would you direct all your answers to the members of this jury?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Cummings, can you state your full legal name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
Charles J. Cummings, Jr., Cummings.
All right, now, Mr. Cummings, where do you live, sir?
I live in Land O'Lakes.
And how long have you lived in Land O'Lakes?
18 years.
All right. And Mr. Cummings, what's your profession?
I'm retired.
Prior to retiring, what did you do?
I was in group insurance,
Okay.
health insurance.
How long were you in that business?
Close to 32 years.
Are you married, sir?
No.
Do you have any children?
Yes, I do.
How many children do you have?
3.
And their names and ages?
Errol is about 45. Alex is 43, and Amber is 39.
Okay. And Mr. Cummings, directing your attention to January 13th of 2014, do you recall that day?
Yes, I do.
Is that day special to you?
Yes,
Can you tell the members of this jury why?
because it's my birthday.
Okay. On January 13th, 2014, was that a Monday?
Yes.
Did you take off from work?
Yes, I did.
Did you plan on going to the movies with your son, Alex?
Yes, sir.
Now, we talked about Alex briefly. Is Alex disabled?
Yes, he's fully disabled.
Okay. Directing your attention to that date, did you go to the Cobb Theater?
Yes, we did.
What movie were you wanting to see?
We wanted to see Lone Survivor.
Okay. You purchased tickets?
Yes, we did.
And what time was the showing?
I think it was about 1:30.
Okay. When you went in, did you go to the concession stand?
No, we did not.
Did you go straight into the theater?
Yes, we did.
When you went into the theater, can you tell the members of this jury what the lighting conditions were inside there?
There was midlight. It was not dark. It was not light. It was midlight.
Okay.
So there was enough light to see.
All right, so it wasn't completely dark like the movie was playing?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. Did you have any difficulties getting to your seat?
No,
Did you have any difficulties observing the people that were in the theater at the time?
no.
Where do you normally sit when you go to a movie?
I normally like to sit in the middle.
Okay. In the middle, low,
middle, high.
high?
Yes.
Okay. When you went into the movie theater and where you normally sit, was there a couple already sitting there?
Yes, there were people already sitting in those seats.
All right. Would that couple later became known to you as the Oulsons?
Yes,
So tell us, you look up and lo and behold, somebody's already sitting in where you would have sat.
correct.
Where did you and your son decide to sit?
We decided to sit at the end seats,
Okay.
same aisle.
All right. What aisle was it?
I think it was the second aisle back from the bistro,
Okay.
from the top.
And when you looked in that direction, could you tell if anybody was sitting behind the Oulsons?
Yes, there were people sitting there.
Okay. Was there an older couple sitting there?
There was a couple sitting there and maybe some other people.
Okay. So you take your seats.
Yes,
Are the previews playing?
yes,
Are they loud?
no,
Okay. You're watching the previews. Did you have a conversation with your son, Alex?
we would say we wanted to see this picture or we're not going to see this picture,
Okay.
things like that.
Did you have any difficulties hearing Alex?
No,
Could you hear conversations, say, 5 rows down?
not, I could hear people talking, but I didn't know what they were saying.
Okay. Now let me ask you, you don't have any hearing disabilities or impairments, right?
No,
All right. So the previews are going, and during the previews, does anything draw your attention to your left?
yes, it does.
Okay. What is the first thing that you saw or heard?
First thing I saw was a light from a cell phone.
Okay. And would that have been Mr. Oulson's cell phone?
It was Mr. Oulson's cell phone.
Where was it?
I believe it was on his lap.
Okay. Let me ask, did you pay much attention to it?
No,
What did you, all right, so you noticed it, and then what'd you do?
back to watching the previews.
Okay. What's the next thing that happens?
The next thing that happened is someone is talking to Mr. Oulson about the cell phone.
Okay. Did Mr. Oulson respond to this gentleman?
Yes, he said something along the lines of, I'm texting my babysitter or I'm texting my daughter's babysitter.
Okay.
Texting.
Texting. This person who you said you later became known to as Mr. Oulson.
Yes.
All right. Was he screaming?
No.
Was he angry?
No.
Was he agitated at that time?
No. Informative.
Okay. So you hear these conversations, you go back to watching the previews, right?
Previews. Yes.
As you're watching the previews, what's the next thing that happens?
The next thing that happened is there was some type of interchange between Oulson and the gentleman sitting behind him. And the gentleman sitting behind him stood up and left the theater.
Okay. Did you hear that conversation, or you couldn't?
No, no, I could not hear their conversation.
Okay. So at that point, Mr. Reeves leaves.
There's the person behind him who was in yes, he left the theater.
All right. What was his demeanor as he left the theater?
He seemed to be shuffling his feet fairly quickly. As he passed my seat, he was mumbling to himself, and it sounded very agitated in that mumbling. And he also hit my seat and the back of my head as he was passing.
All right. Let me ask you. So he hits the back of your seat. Did he say, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir"?
No, he did not.
Did he say, "Excuse me"?
No, he did not.
He didn't say anything to you.
No, he did not.
Did you see him walk out of the theater?
Yes, I did.
Did he have any difficulties walking?
He walked normal as far as I could see.
Okay. How long is he gone?
He's gone about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. While he's gone, is there anything else going on in the theater?
Not that I knew of, just watching the previews again.
All right. Did you see him coming back up?
Yes, I saw him coming back up.
Can you tell the members of this jury his gait? Was he walking rapidly, quick, slow?
He was walking a little bit faster than normal. The reason I watched him because I wanted to make sure he didn't hit my seat again.
Okay. Did he get to his row?
Yes, he did.
Did he have any difficulties? Did he hit the back of your seat or anything then?
No, he didn't.
Okay. Did you see him sit down?
I saw him go to where he was. I don't believe if he sat down, or I saw him get as far as he got to his seat. I don't know if I noticed that he sat down.
Okay. So then you're watching the previews, right?
Back to the previews.
All right. Let me ask you something, Mr. Cummings. Do you wear glasses?
Yes, I do.
Back on January
I
13th?
used to wear glasses.
Okay. On January 13th of 2014, were you wearing glasses?
Yes, I was.
Were you nearsighted or farsighted?
Nearsighted.
Okay. You had your glasses on.
Correct.
Did you have any difficulties seeing in the movie theater?
No, I did not.
Okay. Do you have any problems with your peripheral vision?
On my right eye, I do. On my left eye, I do not.
Okay. So you indicated that it was Alex in the first seat, you in the second seat, right?
Correct. Yes.
So everything that occurred would have been to your left, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you didn't have any difficulty seeing?
No, I did not.
All right. You're sitting there, Mr. Reeves is back. What is the next thing that draws your attention to that area?
There seems to be a heated conversation
Okay. Between Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves?
between Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves.
Okay. Could you hear what Mr. Reeves said?
No, I could not hear what he said exactly, no.
All right, but you could hear him speaking.
I knew that they were conversing.
All right.
Yes.
Could you hear what Mr. Oulson said?
At one point, I heard what he said when he stood up.
Okay. And when he stood up, what did you hear him say?
Are you trying to get me thrown out of the theater or something like that?
All right. Now, prior to the shot, did you ever see Mr. Oulson climbing over his chair?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see him throw a punch?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see him throw an object?
No, I did not.
Prior to the shot, did you ever hear Mr. Reeves say anything or react as if he had been hit either by a punch or an object?
No,
Did you ever see him react, such as, oh, and grab his face
no, I did not.
prior to seeing the flash and hearing the gunshot? Did you ever see Mr. Oulson all the way back, Mr. Reeves all the way back in his chair saying either whoa, 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 or no, no, no?
I did not hear that, no.
Did you see it?
I did not hear it nor see it.
All right. So, getting back to the events. Mr. Oulson standing up, right?
Yes,
You indicated he said, what, are you trying to get me thrown out of the theater?
yes.
What is the next thing that you observe?
The next thing I observe is popcorn in the air.
All right.
Oh.
Do you know how it got in the air?
I do not know how it got in the air, but when it was in the air, that's what caught my attention again.
All right. So popcorn's in the air.
Popcorn's in the air,
What's the next thing that happens?
flash, shot.
Flash and a bang.
Yes,
All right. Immediately or soon thereafter, did you hear Mr. Reeves make a statement?
yes, I did.
Okay. What did you hear him say?
Something along the lines of throw popcorn in my face or throw popcorn at me.
Okay. Did you realize what had happened?
I realized I was a shot,
All right.
and I didn't know if it was anybody was hit.
Okay.
At
So
that
you're, again, it's Alex and you, first and second seats.
Correct.
Did you observe either Mrs. Oulson or Mr. Oulson to start to walk towards the aisle?
Yes, I noticed they both did. Mrs.
Okay.
Oulson first, weeping a little bit, and then Chad was behind her by about a yard and a half.
All right. Was Mrs. Oulson saying anything?
She was just weeping and sounded like she was extremely scared.
All right. Did there come a time when Mr. Oulson was walking towards you?
Yes, he was starting to walk towards.
Prior to getting to where you were, almost at your feet, Prior to falling, what, if anything, did he say?
He said, "I can't believe he shot me."
Did Mr. Oulson fall at your feet?
He did. He fell at my feet, and he also hit my son as he was falling.
Okay. When that happened, did you tell Alex to leave the theater and go call 911?
Yes, I was very concerned about my son. I was very concerned about his safety. I asked him to leave the theater, number one, for his safety, and number two, to call 911.
Okay.
But to get him out of the theater, not knowing what could happen next.
All right. Now let's go back a moment to the conversations that Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves were having. Did you ever hear Mr. Oulson threaten Mr. Reeves?
No, I did not hear him say that.
All right. Did you ever hear him drop the F-bomb?
I did not hear any curse words that day.
At all?
None.
Did you ever hear him say, and excuse me for saying it, "I'm going to kick your ass," or "I'm going to beat your ass," or anything like that?
I did not hear that, no.
Did you ever hear Mr. Oulson threatening Mr. Reeves?
I did not hear him threatening him, no.
All right. So Mr. Oulson is at your feet. What are you doing?
We start, well, somebody came up behind me, but when he went to my feet and his head was on my left foot, I started resuscitation as best as I could. I wasn't sure where the bullet wound was, but I could feel blood on my hand.
Okay. So you started chest compressions.
Compressions is what it's called, yes.
All right. Was he shot in the chest?
I'm not sure where he was shot, but the blood started to come from his chest, so I'm assuming that's where it was. And then within a minute, I knew he was shot in the chest.
All right. So as Mr. Oulson is literally on your feet, are you observing or looking at Mr. Reeves to see what he's doing or not doing?
No,
You're paying attention to Mr. Oulson.
correct.
Right. Is there a time that obviously medical personnel come in and law enforcement comes in?
They came in about 15, 20 minutes later. There was someone helping me with Mr. Oulson. But when the law enforcement arrived, or the medics arrived, they said to me, "We'll take him." So at that
Okay.
point, I got up and left Chad Oulson.
All right. As you were attempting to do CPR on Mr. Oulson, did you get blood on your clothing and your hands and so on and so forth?
Yes. And my shoe, my flip-flops.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask the record reflect that I'm going to show to defense counsel States Exhibits S, T, U, V, W, and X for identification purposes. May I proceed, Judge?
Go ahead, Mr.
All right, may it please the court. Mr. Cummings, as you were performing CPR on Mr. Oulson, did you get blood on your clothing?
Yes,
Your shirt?
my shirt, my pants, my flip-flops.
Okay. What were you wearing that day?
I had a blue fishing shirt, a Columbia shirt, cut-off jeans and flip-flops.
Okay. Did you have blood on your hands?
Yes,
Did you have blood on the palms of your hands?
yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness, please? Mr. Cummings, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit S for identification purposes. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Is that you?
Yes, sir.
And does it depict the blood that you had described previously to the members of this jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish this to the members of this jury, please.
You may. Are you seeking for that to be admitted?
I'm sorry, Judge. Yes, Judge, I would admit it as it's
19,
19?
correct.
19, Judge?
Yep. It'll be admitted.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Cummings, one question that I had neglected to ask you. Did you ever see Mr. Oulson throw a cell phone?
No, I did not.
You said once medical personnel arrived, you went to look for your son.
Correct, that's what I did.
Did you find Alex?
Yes, I did.
Where was he?
He was outside the theater.
Okay. Did you go back into the theater?
Yes, we did.
Were you requested to go back in the theater by law enforcement?
Yes, yes, we were.
Where did you go?
We went to a section in the lower section of the movie theater, and they asked us to stay there.
Was it at the very bottom of the movie
At the
theater?
the bottom seats, yes.
How many people would you say were there?
15, 20.
Okay. Were they congregated in like groups, so to speak?
They were congregated with the people they came to the movie with, I think.
Right, like a husband and wife,
Yeah.
and then maybe another couple?
Like Alex and I stayed together. right?
Okay. Did you hear them conversing?
I could hear them conversing, but I didn't hear what they were saying.
Okay. Did you hear any of them saying anything about what they had just seen or heard?
No, nor was I listening
Okay.
for that.
Did you talk to any of them?
No,
Did you know any of them?
no,
Did you know anyone that was in that movie theater?
no,
Okay. So y'all are gathered around down there, right?
yes,
Does law enforcement come and pass out what would be a witness statement, a blank form?
they passed out something that was a blank form. I didn't know what it was.
All right. Were you given any instructions as to what to do?
Yeah, what did you see? Did you write it down? Something like that.
Okay. And did you in fact give a written statement?
Yes, I did.
And was it brief?
It was brief. I just wanted to write the salient points.
Okay.
I wasn't given instructions on anything else.
The main topics, right?
The main points as to what happened.
At the time you gave the written statement, did you know that you were going to get interviewed by a Pasco County detective?
Yes, I did.
And After you had given the written statement, did you subsequently get interviewed by Detective James Garapi of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office?
I was interviewed by a detective. I can't say if that's his name or not, yes.
Okay. And did you go more in depth with Detective Garapi as to what you saw, what you heard,
Yes,
and he was taking notes?
yes.
Now, Mr. Cummings, did you ever see Mr. Oulson with either his knee or standing in his seat?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see him completely coming over his seat and in Mr. Reeves's space?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see Mr. Oulson in an aggressive stance towards Mr. Reeves?
No, I did not.
Did you ever see Mr. Reeves with his left hand out, holding or pushing Mr. Oulson away?
No, I did not.
May I have a moment, Your Honor, please?
You may.
Your Honor, I have no further questions of Mr. Cummings at this time. Thank you.
Garcia. Mr. Michaels?
Mr. Cummings, I'm just going to start with one of the last things you talked about with the prosecutor. You told the prosecutor that when you were interviewed, first of all, when you did your statement form, you just wrote bare details.
Yes, sir.
When you talked to the detective, however, you gave the detective all the details within your knowledge, right?
I gave him a lot more detail, yes.
Okay, but you certainly gave him everything you knew at the time, right?
I gave him everything that I saw at the time, within the condition of my mind at the time.
Okay, and you were able to give him quotes of what people said, for instance, right?
Whatever I gave him, I gave him.
And so you understood what he was saying to you, right?
Yes, I did.
You didn't have any difficulty in communicating with him?
No, but it's the first time I had that type of communication.
I understand. I'm just trying to understand because we're talking about a written statement which is very bare and then a more involved interview.
Correct,
So the interview is more involved in more details.
correct.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about, number one, walking into the theater. The prosecutor asked you if it's loud, because you went in during the previews and you said it wasn't loud.
No, it's the normal sound of a preview.
Okay, so it was pretty loud then, right?
No, I could hear, but I could also see people, hear people.
So you wouldn't call it pretty loud?
No,
Okay. Page 18, lines 18 through 25. I know we're here in 2020.
I would object. The proper way would be to show the witness the statement first.
Your Honor, may we approach? Cummings, in this case, you gave a deposition back on March 16th, 2015. Remember that?
I remember depositions in this case, yes.
Okay, maybe not the exact
The
date.
exact date, yes, sir.
But you remember at some point sitting in an office in this building, right?
Yes,
With a court reporter,
yes,
with myself, right?
yes,
Mr. Escobar,
yes,
a couple of members of the state attorney's office.
correct,
We put you under oath, remember that?
correct,
Swore to tell the truth. And we asked you questions,
correct,
and you gave us answers.
correct.
Well,
Your Honor, before you ask the questions, can you repeat me?
Yeah.
let's go back to talking about the deposition, okay?
Yes,
The question was asked, to put it into context, I'll go back a little bit. And you sat down, question, what were the noise conditions in there? Were the previews playing? Answer, just the previews. Remember that?
yes,
Okay. Question, line 22, were they loud? Answer, pretty loud. Remember that?
yes,
Okay. So now you agree with me that the previews were playing and it was pretty loud in there, right?
there are parts of previews that are pretty loud, depending upon the scene that they're showing. If they're showing an action scene, it's usually louder than when they have a dialogue or a love scene, or an explanation.
All right. And
So
so,
it's mixed.
and so is there a reason why you didn't make that explanation to the prosecutor and you feel compelled to make it to me now?
No,
During the previews, you heard some conversations to your left, right?
yes,
Now, to your left was seated the individuals that turn out to be Mr. and Mrs. Oulson.
yes,
Mr. Oulson closer to you, Mrs. Oulson on the other side of Mr. Oulson.
yes,
Now, at first, you just heard one voice, and that was Mr. Oulson's voice.
yes,
He's in the same row.
yes.
And that's when you heard something about texting my daughter.
Texting my daughter or my daughter's babysitter.
Okay. And you said that that person was doing it in a informational tone, but he was also doing it in an authoritative voice, right?
He was explaining what he was doing, yes. It was,
It was an authoritative voice, right?
I don't think it was authoritative. I think it was frustrational, maybe.
Okay. Page 21, line 3. Going back to that deposition, okay? Okay? Question, line 2. Was he doing that in a loud voice? The answer before was, just to put it in context, he was explaining to someone about texting and something about his daughter. Remember that?
Yes,
Question, was he doing that in a loud voice? Answer, authoritarian. Remember that?
Judge,
Yes.
I'm going to object. If you read further, he also said informational. So I think Mr. Michaels is taking that out of context.
Sustained. Read.
Okay. You did use that word though, right?
I used that word.
And that voice was louder than the previews were.
Yes, I could hear him, yes.
And it's been your experience in theaters, usually people don't talk that loud, right?
Usually they don't talk. The nicer people don't.
Now, the person behind Mr. Oulson that turns out to be Curtis Reeves gets up and leaves the theater.
Yes,
Now, you talk about him bumping your chair and your head. We can agree you don't know what part of his body did that.
no, I'm assuming his leg, knee.
And certainly, you don't take that as on purpose,
No,
because you're a big fella, and back then you were even bigger fella. We're talking about a while back now, right?
yes, sir.
I know you used to lift weights and all that.
Yes, sir.
And so you were leaning back in your chair a bit to be comfortable watching the movie, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so the bumping of your chair was accidental as far as you knew, right?
I didn't think he was wanting to hit the back of my chair nor the back of my head.
All right. Now, you said that Mr. Reeves was mumbling. We can agree that you didn't hear what he was saying.
No, I didn't. No, I couldn't understand what he was saying.
So you don't know if as he was passing people, he was saying, "Excuse me, pardon me." You don't know what he was
He
saying.
didn't say, excuse me. I would have understood that.
Well, if he
He was,
mumbled,
he was mumbling before he got to me.
okay, so you could hear him mumbling before he got to you.
Yeah, he was shuffling his feet and mumbling, and then he passed by.
Okay, and we can agree you didn't hear what he was saying.
Absolutely not.
So you're telling us you can hear what he's not saying, but you can't hear what he's saying. Right?
Correct.
Now, when you saw him walking, he wasn't walking in a way that gave you the impression that he was upset. I'm talking about Mr. Reeves, right?
Upset?
Right.
I couldn't tell, but if his gait said he was upset, no.
Okay. So in other words, he wasn't stomping out or walking out.
No, he was not. Just, but he was moving.
Now, you also saw when he came back up the stairs.
Yes,
And when you saw Mr. Reeves coming back up the stairs again, nothing that you observed indicated to you that he was mad, right?
no,
Nothing indicated to you that Mr. Reeves was angry at all, right?
no,
And then within a couple of minutes of Mr. Reeves coming back, now a conversation you hear again between Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves, right?
yes,
And what you heard is not Mr. Reeves' voice, you heard Mr. Oulson's voice, right?
yes,
And it's a voice you recognized before when you heard it during the previews.
yes.
You didn't hear any other voice.
No, I could not hear the voice.
You couldn't hear the voice of Mr. Reeves.
No, I could not hear. I could hear he was talking. There was some conversation, but I wasn't sure what they were saying.
You could only hear Mr. Oulson's voice.
Yes, the only discernible voice was Chad Oulson's.
And you did not hear any other voice.
No, I can't say that who was speaking, but he was speaking with someone.
So you're saying now you heard another voice,
Yes,
okay? Page 31. Lines 10 through 12. Going back to the deposition, okay?
yes,
Question. Okay. Did you hear any other voice other than Mr. Oulson's? Answer. No. Remember that?
yes,
And that's a statement you gave under oath back
yes,
years ago, right?
yes,
Now, when you heard Mr. Oulson and nobody else, he sounded irritated to you, right? Mr. Oulson?
sounded irritated, yes.
And he sounded mad, right?
Sounded upset.
Did he sound mad to you?
I don't know, upset, mad,
Is it the same to you?
no.
Okay, so mad is different than upset.
Yeah, mad is, you're probably going to take some action. Upset is you're in the discussion phase.
So add means that if somebody's mad to you, it means they're going to take some action. They're more angry than just being upset.
Potentially, correct.
Page 32. Lines 3 and 4. To put it in context, we'll start on page 31, line 23. Question, we're now after Mr. Reeves comes back. Mr. Oulson's back to saying something, and he's saying something in that same loud tone. Question, answer, he's saying something, he sounds irritated. Question, okay, he sounds mad. Answer, yeah. Right?
Okay, so I said that.
I'm gonna object. It's improper impeachment, that's what he said.
so you recall in that deposition saying that Mr. Oulson was mad, right?
Yes.
Now, during this time where Mr. Oulson sounds mad, he says something to the effect of, you trying to get me kicked out of the movie, something like that.
Yes.
And he's directing that towards Mr. Reeves.
He was talking to Mr. Reeves, yes.
And he said that in a loud tone, right?
Yes, I could hear that.
And that's when he, Mr. Oulson, stood up.
I think he was standing up when he said it.
And at first he was facing the theater screen when he stood up, then he turned to face Mr. Reeves.
He was talking to him, yes.
And at the time he was irritated, right?
Yes.
Now, he was leaning towards Mr. Reeves at this time like a person who was upset would talk to someone.
He was leaning slightly over to get his point across.
Well, would you characterize it as like a person who was upset would talk to someone?
Yes.
And he was yelling, right?
I could hear his voice, yes.
He was yelling, was he not?
He brought it, his voice was above normal, yes.
Well, let's talk about that. To you, voice above normal is different than yelling, isn't it?
It wasn't a total yell. I mean, a total yell is obviously almost screaming. He wasn't screaming it, but his voice was above normal, yes.
Was it yelling?
No, I wouldn't say it was yelling.
Page 40, lines 24 and 25. Question, line 24. He was yelling? Answer, yeah. Remember that?
Yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked you, did you see Mr. Oulson throw anything? You said no, right?
I did not see him throw anything.
You didn't see Mr. Oulson lean into the aisle where Mr. Reeves was seated and with his wife at all.
No, I did not.
You didn't see him reach in to grab the popcorn.
I did not see that.
Now, you wrote a statement, and may I show it to you? Your Honor, I guess I should mark this as defense exhibit. I'm not going to place it to evidence at this time, but for identification, I'm not sure where we are. Is this number one, maybe?
What is it? Sure.
Cummings, I'm going to show you something that has been marked for identification purposes as Defense Exhibit 111. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? All right.
Okay,
There you go, Mr. Cummings. Recognize that document?
yes,
Okay. And is that your signature at the bottom?
yes,
Is that your handwriting?
yes,
You see the date on it? Should be
yes,
somewhere
yes, I
on
see
the
that, yes,
back. Okay. And so you recognize that document, correct?
yes,
And that's a document that you hand wrote, correct?
yes,
And that you signed.
yes,
And that happened at the time of the incident at the theater, right?
yes,
Okay. Thank you. You got a chance to read it? Did I give you a chance to read it? I
yes,
apologize.
yeah,
Okay. So we can agree that in that document, you didn't put anything about throw popcorn at me, that sort of thing, right?
Object to, maybe approach.
as I was saying, Mr. Cummings, had a chance to look at your written statement, and there's nothing in there about the popcorn. You'll agree with me, right?
Yes,
And certainly you explained to the prosecutor, well, I didn't really give a very detailed statement, I just put in the basics, right?
salient points,
Okay. Such as, you will agree with me that the old man came back alone, talking about Mr. Reeves, right?
yes,
He got into an argument with the man sitting next to me, Mr. Oulson, right?
yes,
Man sitting to right of me got up and confronted old man.
correct,
Okay, and then Mr. Oulson got shot.
correct,
Okay. Now, you talked to a police officer, a detective, the prosecutor talked to you about that and said, remember speaking to Detective Garapi, your answer was, I don't remember the name,
correct,
but certainly you remember speaking to the detective.
yes,
And you told the prosecutor you gave a more detailed
yes,
account of what happened, right?
yes,
Well, do you remember telling that detective that that you attended the movie with your son Alexander? Remember that?
yes,
That they, talking about Mr. Oulson, were sitting in.
Jack, can we approach?
All right. You told the detective you attended the movie with your son Alexander. Remember that?
yes,
Okay. And that Mr. Oulson was sitting in the same. You were sitting in the same role as Mr. Oulson, right?
yes,
Okay. You heard some kind of communication during the preview, right?
yes,
Between Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves.
yes,
That Mr. Reeves left the theater, kicked the back of the Mr. Oulson seat.
that was a mistake, but I don't know if he did that,
Okay. You meant your seat.
I don't know, yes, he hit my seat, I don't know if he hit Olson's seat,
Okay. That Mr. Reeves was grumbling as he left.
yes,
Then at some point, that Mr. Oulson then stood up and tossed his popcorn in the air.
there was popcorn in the air,
That you didn't think that Mr. Oulson threw it directly at Mr. Reeves.
I just saw popcorn in the air,
You don't remember saying that.
not correctly, no,
Pardon me?
not exactly, no,
Okay. Less than 20 seconds later, the suspect, Mr. Reeves, shot Mr. Oulson in the chest and stated, "Do that to my face." Remember that? It's in quotation marks.
yes,
Okay. So you didn't tell that detective that Mr. Reeves said, "Throw popcorn at me," right?
whatever I told the detective that time, I told him,
You told him that Mr. Reeves said, "Do that to my face." Right? You agree with that?
okay, that's what I said,
May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
No further questions.
Redirect?
Judge, we have no further questions of Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
We're good, we have him under subpoena.
Subject to recall, Your Honor.
Okay, subject to recall. Mr. Cummings, you're free to go, but it's possible you could get recalled.
Pardon me?
You could,
Okay.
are you available by cell phone or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute recess, and all things being equal, if you don't mind, when we take recesses, would you just either head to the jury pool room and stay there, or go in the deliberation room? There's a lot of folks out and about, and I don't want you to run into any conversations, okay? So head to the jury pool room or stay back there. All right, 10 minutes. Remember my instructions during the recess.
All right.
Thank you.
Recess for
Okay.
Jurors entering the courtroom, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy. Ladies and gentlemen, were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All right, excellent. We'll get started. Mr. Garcia or Mr. Rosenwasser?
Statement called Jane Roy.
Tina, is that chair okay, the witness chair? Does it sit down too low?
I tried to get it up as high as it'll go.
And it won't go,
That's
okay,
as high as it'll go.
okay,
Look for one.
maybe.
Okay. You can just say, follow me, come to me. You're gonna turn and face the clerk, raise your right hand. Okay.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Okay, come on. Like you said, you're gonna see your first here. And just speak into the mic for me, okay, make yourself comfortable.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosenwasser.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Can you please state your name and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Jane Roy, Janeroy.
Okay, and you don't have to tell us exactly where you live, but what city do you live in?
Lutz.
All right. Back on January 13th of 2014, were you living in the same location?
Yes.
Are you currently employed?
No, I'm retired.
Okay, and what are you retired from?
I was a bookkeeper
All right, how long were you a bookkeeper for?
from 1979 to 2000.
Okay, so about over 20 years.
Yes.
All right. Back on January 13th of 2014, did you decide to go to the movies?
Yes, we did.
And who were you going to go to the movies with?
My husband.
Now, looking at you, and I don't think members of the jury can see that side of your face, but let's talk about, for lack of a better word, a disability. Do you have any disabilities with respect to hearing in your left ear?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is that?
I had a brain tumor. It was called an acoustic neuroma, and it left me paralyzed on the left side of my face. I couldn't close my eye, and I was deaf in my left ear.
Okay, and because of the issue with your eye, did you have any procedure done?
Yes, I had to have a tarsography because the fact that I couldn't close the lid was damaging the retina, and my eye was drying up, and there was a lot of pain involved, so they closed the eye to keep it moist.
Okay, and to help out the court reporter, did you write down exactly how to spell that particular procedure? Or give it to me? I have it.
I will try.
No, I have it. I have it written down. So for the
Okay.
court reporter, it's TARSORRHAPHY. All right, so let's talk about January 13th of 2014. You and your husband decided to go to a movie?
Yes.
And what movie theater was that?
Theater 10, I believe it was at the Grove in
Okay.
Wesley Chapel.
Okay, the Grove Theater in Wesley Chapel. You think it
Yes.
was in theater number 10?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, do you know what movie it was?
Yes, The Lone Survivor.
Okay. Do you remember about what time it was starting?
It was an early afternoon matinee.
Okay, sometime after 1 maybe?
Yes,
All right. You all purchased tickets there?
yes, outside.
Did you go to the concession stand?
No,
You went directly into theater number 10?
we did.
When you go to the movies, do you all sit in a particular spot when you go to the movies?
Yes,
Okay, and tell the members of the jury where it is that you and your husband like to sit.
we like to sit in the last row in the center of the theater.
All right. When you walked into the theater, do you remember if there were any advertisements or previews playing?
Yes, the previews were on.
All right, so let's talk about that. When you walk into the theater, do you turn around to look at the theater to see where you're going to sit?
Yes, but we already know that we're going to go up there.
Okay, well, but you had to turn around and you're looking at the theater and you're going to go up to the back row. correct?
Yes,
All right. When you first get into this theater, what are the lighting conditions like?
the lights have been muted because the show has not started yet.
Okay, so you're using the term muted. Let's describe that a little bit more. Could you see the seats when you turned around to look at the theater?
Yes,
All right. So it wasn't dark like when the movie starts.
no,
All right. Could you see people sitting in those seats?
yes,
Could you see the steps?
yes,
So eventually you made your way up to the back row, correct?
yes.
Any difficulty at all seeing your way from the bottom all the way up to where you're going to sit?
No,
You didn't need a flashlight or to use a phone
Oh,
or anything
no.
like that? Okay. So although it was muted, you're saying that you could see clearly in the theater?
yes,
All right. With respect to the volume, when you sat down in your seats, okay? Well, let's talk about where you sat. You said you like to sit in the back row, and then where?
in the center.
All right, were you able to sit in the center on this particular day?
No, there was already a couple sitting there.
All right, so let's just fast forward for a second. This couple that you're talking about, was that individual involved in the shooting that we're going to be discussing?
Yes,
All right. Did you later learn the name of that person or that couple?
yes, I found out that their name, it was Curtis Reeves. I don't know his wife's name.
Okay, but you didn't know them at the time of the shooting?
I knew nobody in the theater.
Okay, and eventually we're going to talk about someone that was shot. Did you come to learn that person's name later on?
Yes, that
Okay.
was Chad Oulson.
Okay, all right, but again, you didn't know him either.
I knew nobody.
All right, so when we're talking about the names, it's just because after the shooting you learned the names of those individuals?
Yes,
All right, so you indicated that the Reeves were sitting in the seats that you wanted to sit in, was that correct?
yes.
All right, so where in relation to the Reeves did you end up sitting?
Well, it was Mr. Reeves, his wife, an empty seat, then it was myself, and then my husband.
Okay. And the left side was then facing the Reeves, is that correct?
Yes,
All right, and that, we already talked about, that was the side that you have a little bit of difficulty.
yes.
All right. So when you sat down in the seats, you indicated the previews were on. How would you describe the volume in the theater at that time?
Loud, but not loud like when the movie is on.
Okay, so let's talk about that. When you say loud, did you have any difficulty in hearing your husband?
No, no, we were able to converse.
Okay, even though the previews were on?
Yes,
Didn't have to speak any louder than the previews?
no,
Okay. Could you hear other conversations? And by that I mean this, could you hear like the mumbling of voices?
yes,
All right, even though there were previews, you could hear that?
yes,
Were you specifically listening to anyone else's conversation?
no,
All right, so you couldn't hear the words, but at the same time you weren't paying attention to other people?
exactly.
All right, but you could hear that there are other people in the theater?
Yes,
All right, and still see them?
yes.
Did there come a point in time when your attention was focused to your left?
Yes.
Okay, what was one of the first things that happened that caused you to start looking to your left?
Well, they started talking about the turning the cell phone off.
Okay, that's like during the previews?
Yes. And I noticed some commotion to my left, so I turned to directly look at them, and Mr. Reeves was leaned over speaking to Chad Oulson, and I could see a light, so I figured that he had a phone and he was on his phone.
Okay, when you say he was on his phone, who are you referring to?
Chad Oulson,
Okay,
sorry.
Could you see from where you were on which side of Chad Oulson's body that light was from? Do you know if he was holding it in his right hand or left hand at the time, or you just saw a light?
I saw a light.
Okay. And how much time do you think had passed between the time that the message went on in the preview about the cell phones and you saw the defendant reach or lean over to talk to Chad Oulson?
Almost as soon as they started talking, I saw Mr. Reeves lean over to talk to Mr. Oulson.
Okay.
It was almost immediate.
Almost immediately after the message was played
It
about
was
the
on
cell
the
phone.
screen, yes.
Okay. So it's not like 3 or 4 minutes went by, it was
Oh,
immediate.
no, no.
After you saw the defendant lean over to Mr. Oulson and have that conversation, what's the next thing that you saw?
Mr. Reeves stood up, and he turned to it would have been his left, and he started walking through the aisle of the theater to go down.
Okay. Were you on the right of Mr. Reeves?
I was on the right of Mr. Reeves, yes.
Okay, because might have to orientate you a little bit. Did Mr. Reeves walk by you to get out of the row?
Yes, he did. He turned to go out the row. He was walking quickly. He was mumbling. He seemed to be upset or irate about something, and he went down the row and down the stairs.
Okay, so when you said that he went to his left, did you mean that he went to his right? to pass by you?
Oh, yes, that's right, too. It would have been his right, yes, yes,
Okay. So you indicated that as he's passing by you, you're watching him.
yes.
All right. And you also hear him?
Well, I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he was mumbling.
Okay. Did it appear to you that he was having a conversation with his wife?
Oh, absolutely not.
All right. And why are you saying that?
Well, he had been past her. I mean, there was an empty seat and her on my left, and by that time he was in front of me. He wasn't turned back towards his wife like he would have been talking to her, and he was mumbling in front of me, and he was mumbling as he went by, so
Okay.
wouldn't have made sense.
And did you watch him as he exited out your row?
Well, I saw him walk by and get into the stairway.
Okay. And did you watch him go out, or you just
I
started
saw
paying
him go
attention?
down the stairs.
Okay. Did you see him having any difficulty when he was leaving the aisle or going down the rows, anything like that?
Not at all.
All right. Did he have a cane or anything that was helping him walk?
No.
How would you describe Mr. Reeves? Small, medium? How would you
Oh,
describe
no,
him?
he was a large man.
When he walked by, did he say anything to you?
No,
Ever say excuse me or anything like that?
no.
Now, prior to seeing the defendant get up and leave, did you see any type of threatening behavior between anybody before
No.
he got up to leave?
No,
All right. Did you see Chad Oulson get up to climb over the row?
no,
See Chad Oulson threatening
no.
Mr. Reeves? Okay. At that point, it just seemed like there was a discussion about the cell phone, and then Mr. Reeves left.
Yes.
Do you know approximately how long? I know you weren't timing it, there was no reason to, but do you know about how long it was that the defendant had left the theater?
3 to 5 minutes.
Did you notice when he came back into the theater?
Yes.
Okay, and where, just approximately, was it that you first saw him coming back into the theater?
I guess when he was probably halfway up the stairway, I would see his head, and then I noticed that he was coming back up.
Okay. Did he have to walk by you again, obviously?
Yes.
All right, did he have any difficulty walking up the stairs, walking through the row to get to the middle?
No, at that point I had pulled my legs up because I was afraid that he was going to bump me again, but no, he just walked right by and he sat down.
Okay, and by bumping you, you don't mean he intentionally bumped you?
Oh, no,
Okay,
no.
just when someone exits a row, that's just what happens in a movie
Yes.
theater. Do you see Mr. Reeves sit down, or do you just see him go back to the area that he was sitting?
As far as I remember, he came into the row and he sat down. He went next to his wife and he sat down.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens a few moments after that. Do you then get your attention directed to the left again at some point?
Yes, I could see that there was something going on, so I turned to look, and Mr. Oulson had stood up, and he looked at Mr. Reeves, and he said, "You went and reported me."
Okay. Now, when you say that Mr. Oulson had stood up, is he in his row?
Yes. No, he never left his row. He just stood in front of his seat, and he looked at Mr. Reeves, and he said, "You went and reported me," or something to that effect.
Okay, and then what happened next?
Well, the first thing I knew, popcorn went flying, and almost immediately I saw Mr. Reeves' hand come up, and I saw a flash of red, and I thought, what the heck? There was a loud noise, it smelled, and then I thought, oh my God, he shot him. And then I saw Chad Oulson turn around. He was facing Mr. Reeves, so he would have turned to his left to go out the row, like he was going to exit the row, but then he fell right in front of me.
Okay. When you heard that noise, was it a loud noise?
Yes.
Okay. Were you shocked?
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about this just a little bit more. When Mr. Oulson stood up, did you see him attempt to climb over into what would basically be your row?
Never.
Okay. Did he start threatening to beat up or kill or anything like that?
No.
Did you ever see him throw an object? And by him, I mean, did you see Chad Oulson throw any objects at the defendant?
Absolutely not.
Did you hear the defendant say anything, and it's going to sound kind of silly, but exclaim like, "Oh my God," or "I'm hit," or "I'm hurt," anything like that?
Never.
Did you ever hear the defendant yelling at all?
No.
Did you ever see the defendant putting his arm out and yelling, "No, no, no," or "Whoa, whoa, whoa," as if someone was attacking him?
Never. Never.
Did you ever see a female with Chad Oulson?
No. I was so concerned that Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves were going to have a physical altercation. And I thought that Mr. Reeves was going to stand up as quickly as he did when he left to go out of the theater, and he was going to punch Mr. Oulson in the nose or something like that. I never expected a shot. I thought it was going to be a physical thing.
Okay, so you thought the defendant was going to attack Chad Oulson physically?
Yes, yeah, he was the one that appeared to me to be mad.
Okay, not Mr. Oulson.
No,
At any point in time, did you see Chad Oulson physically attack this defendant?
never.
And we talked about ever hearing the defendant say anything. Did you ever see the defendant, Mr. Reeves here, hold his head as if he was hurt or attacked or thrown something at him? Anything at all like that?
Never.
All right, once you heard the shot, where did you focus your attention?
I was just staring at in front of me. It was so shocking. I've never seen anybody shot before. It was petrifying, and my husband had to grab me and say, "Come on, we have to leave."
Okay. Did you see Mr. Oulson start walking towards the aisle?
I did.
Okay, and did he ever make it to the aisle?
No, like I said, he turned after what I realized when he was shot, and he took, I'm going to say 2 steps, 3 steps, and he fell like right in front of, not in front of my seat, but in the row right in front of me on the ground.
Okay. Did you see people trying to help him?
Yes, there was a young man there, and he came over and he opened his shirt or something, and I saw some blood, and that was it.
Okay. Now, at this point in time, did you ever look back at Mr. Reeves, or were you focused on leaving the theater?
Well, when we started to leave the theater, I turned around to look back, and Mr. Reeves was just sitting there, like, he was just very calm.
Did you eventually leave the theater?
Yes.
And where did you go? Meaning leaving theater number 10, did you stay within the movie theater complex?
Yes, we had to go down into the concession area.
Okay, and what was the reason for that?
But they told us that somebody would be by to take our statements.
And were you handed any forms?
Yes.
When you were handed these forms, were you given any instructions about how to fill it out?
No, they just told us to write down what we saw.
Okay, and just based on being told to write down what you saw, did you write down something?
I did.
Okay, did you write down an incredibly detailed statement?
No. Matter of fact, if you look at my statement, you can see how shaky my handwriting was. It was, you know, I just thought they wanted us to say we saw somebody get shot, and that's all I wrote.
Okay, to you that was what the information was?
Yes.
All right. Did you think you were going to be interviewed by some type of deputy or a detective later after that?
I was, yes.
Okay. And were you, was that done in the theater?
Yes.
When you were in the theater, did you discuss what you saw with all the other patrons that were in there?
No. My husband and I sat by ourselves at a table, and we didn't talk to anybody.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Escobar?
Please, the court, counsel.
Good morning, Ms. Roy.
Good morning.
Ms. Roy, well, let me ask you this question. What year were you born?
1948.
Okay. You talked initially on direct examination about your disability,
Yes,
and you had that disability back on January the 13th of 2014, is that correct?
I did.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that disability. You cannot see from your left eye at all.
If they unsewed my eye, I would be able to see. There's nothing wrong with the vision, but it's because of a medical problem that they closed the
So
eye.
from the left side, you can't see?
Right,
Okay. You can see from your right eye.
yes,
You have glasses.
yes.
And are you nearsighted or farsighted?
I think I'm both.
You think you're both? Okay.
I have, what do they call that? Progressive lenses.
Okay. And I believe you indicated on direct examination likewise that as a result of this tumor that you suffered, you lost the hearing also on your left side.
Yes,
So is it true then that in order to see someone on your left side that you would have to turn your head?
I do.
Okay. One of the reasons that you have your husband seating to your right at a theater is because of that issue, correct?
Yes,
Your right ear, which is your better ear, would be able to hear your husband.
right,
Is that correct?
yes,
And your right eye, who is your only eye, would be able to see your husband easily by just, right?
yes,
Okay. Now, you also have some balance problems, is my understanding. Is that correct?
yes, yes,
And you developed those balance problems actually before January the 13th of 2014, correct?
yes. I've had 3 brain tumors. During the 3rd brain tumor, they cut my vestibular schwannoma, and I had a stroke during that surgery.
Okay. And that obviously has affected your...
Yes, the vestibular schwannoma controls your balance.
Yes, ma'am. Now, prior to January the 13th of 2014, you did not have any testing on your right ear, is that correct?
I did not.
Now, you would agree with me that, I believe you indicated on direct examination that when you came into the theater, were the previews playing? Is that what you indicated
Yes.
to Mr. Rosenwasser?
Yes,
Okay. And so, do you know, when you came into the theater, how long the previews had already been playing?
I have no idea.
Okay. But you would agree that when you came into the theater, certainly the interior of the theater was pretty dark.
Well, I don't know if you would say pretty dark. I would call it more muted. You could see the seats. You could see people were seated there.
Page 15, lines 9 through 11. Ms. Roy, you remember me taking your deposition?
I do
Back,
not.
March 23rd, 2015.
It's possible. I spoke with so many people right after that. If you say I did it, I did it.
Okay. And you remember March 23rd, 2015 was closer to January 13, 2014
Yes,
than we are today.
this is true.
And do you remember the question that I posed to you? But the interior of the theater is pretty dark. Is that fair to say? You said yes.
Well, to me, pretty dark could be muted, yes.
You would agree that your statement back in 2015 was more accurate because it was closer to the event.
Well, I still think it was muted.
Now, you would also agree that the previews were loud.
Yes, but not as loud as the movie.
Okay.
I mean, I can talk now and it's loud, or I can talk now and it's loud.
And you would agree that the announcement for patrons in that theater to turn off their phones had already been displayed on the screen.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're trying to tell me.
Okay. You know, in these theaters, they have an announcement,
Yes,
right? It says, turn off your phones, right? Put off your phones, turn off your phones,
okay.
don't text. That announcement had already come on. You remember that announcement, do you not?
Yes,
Okay. And so you had put your phone away.
I don't have a phone.
Okay, do your husband have a phone?
No,
Okay. So you're seated there, and you certainly don't hear any commotion whatsoever from Mr. Reeves, who is seated just 3 seats from you.
no, but I could sense motion.
Okay, but you didn't hear anything, correct?
No,
Okay. And had you already turned over to look at Mr. Reeves by that time?
yes, I was in the movie theater and they were having commercials, which you see a million times, so I was looking around.
Okay, so you're in the movie theater, you're seated, the previews are loud, and it's pretty dark. That's the scene that you were in, correct?
Your Honor, I'd object characterization of pretty dark. She clarified and indicated it was muted as well.
That's what you were in, that condition, correct?
The movie was not the previews were not as loud as the movie,
Okay.
and I could see things going on in the theater, so it was not completely dark.
You were looking at the previews?
No, I just told you, I was looking around the theater.
So you weren't interested in the previews?
Absolutely not.
Okay, and your husband wasn't either?
I have no idea what he was interested in.
Was he talking to you?
No,
Okay. Now, you indicated that you saw Mr. Reeves lean forward, is that correct?
yes,
But you could not tell what was being discussed by Mr. Reeves.
that's true.
And then, what does he do after that? He leans
Mr.
forward, what does he do next?
He stands up to go out the row.
So are you telling this court that he leans forward? How long is he in that position?
5-6 seconds.
Okay, and then he immediately gets up and leaves, is what you're telling this court?
That's the way I remember it.
Okay. Now, you would agree that the aisle, if you're seated in a seat at the Cobb Theater, the aisle in front of you is limited space, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you would agree that even before Mr. Reeves starts leaving the theater, you had noticed some mumbling going on from patrons that were in the row in front of you. Mumbling.
well, I don't know if it was mumbling, but chattering, yes.
Did you ever tell me in a deposition that it was mumbling?
I really don't remember what I said 8 years ago. I have no idea.
So it could have been mumbling that you
It could have
told
been mumbling, could have been chattering.
me. Okay. And did you think that because those individuals in front of you were mumbling, that somehow they were mad, those patrons?
No,
Okay. So you see Mr. Reeves start moving in your direction
yes,
to leave the theater.
yes,
And you indicated, I believe, on direct examination, that Mr. Reeves was angry.
yes.
And tell me what it was that gave you the impression at that moment that Mr. Reeves was angry.
He stood up quickly. He had a frown on his face when he was passing in front of me.
Mhm.
He was mumbling. And if you think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and you see Grumpy, that's what he looked like. That's
Okay.
what it struck me as. So he looked angry to me.
So you're saying that you looked at him and he looked, his facial features were what?
Like a frown.
Like a frown. Okay. And so in addition to the frown, you say you heard mumbling. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or did you hear what was being mumbled?
I did not.
Now, you would agree that since there's limited space in front of you, if someone gets up and he's walking in that limited space, you're going to say, "Excuse me," right?
I would.
And you certainly wouldn't say, "Excuse me," because the previews are playing and you have patrons all around you. You wouldn't say, "Excuse me." You would, in a very low tone, say, "Excuse me."
I would make direct contact with that person and I would go, "Excuse me."
But what if the individual's just saying, "Excuse me," as he walks by in a low tone?
He was not saying "excuse me."
Well, how do you know? You don't know what the mumbling was.
Does not sound like "excuse me."
Okay. Now, Mr. Reeves's wife was right near him, correct?
Yes,
Okay, basically a seat, right?
yes.
And were you looking at her, or were you looking at Mr. Reeves as he was passing by?
Mr. Reeves.
Okay, and so you don't know if she was mumbling.
That's true.
Now, your position also is that as Mr. Reeves was trying to navigate that narrow area in front of your knees, your position is that he wasn't holding the wall or bracing himself against the wall, right?
There was no wall.
There was no wall behind you.
No?
Okay. And I think we've agreed that he didn't step on your toes,
He bumped my foot.
and you don't believe that that was on purpose?
That was not intentional.
Okay. Now, you agree that Mr. Reeves is gone, right? For
Yes.
several minutes, right?
Yeah, 3 to 5, I guess.
Okay.
Something like that.
And as you see him walking up the stairs, walking up normally,
Yes,
and then he sat down, correct?
yes.
And not only did he sit down, but you believe that he spoke to his wife.
I don't remember that.
You went out?
I do not remember that.
Or did you ever tell me that in a deposition that he spoke to his wife at that moment?
I keep telling you, I don't remember the deposition, so I don't remember if he spoke to his wife. It was a long time ago.
Okay. Your position is that you didn't hear him say anything.
I did not.
Now, while Mr. Reeves is saying nothing, it is when Mr. Oulson stands up, right?
Yes,
And tells Mr. Reeves, "You reported me to management."
I did not hear management. I heard you reported me.
You reported me. And you could tell at that moment that Mr. Oulson was not happy.
Well, I suppose not.
In fact, you believe he was angry.
I did not say he was angry. I said he reported me to, you reported me to management.
Did he say that in an angry way?
I don't know Mr. Oulson, so I don't know if for him that was angry. It didn't strike me as angry. It was more like he was annoyed, like, you reported me to management?
So are you telling me that because you don't know Mr. Oulson, you can't tell us when he's angry, but you can look at Mr. Reeves?
Oh, well,
And if he's
Mr. Oulson,
mumbling,
Mr.
you can
Oulson
tell
was
us
not
that Mr. Reeves is
frowning.
angry.
Mr. Oulson was not frowning and mumbling. He was clear spoken, and he said, you reported me.
Okay. Now, certainly that conversation by Mr. Oulson was louder than what you would have expected in a movie theater.
Yes, probably.
And you just indicated that Mr. Oulson's facial features did not indicate to you that he was mad, right? He wasn't frowning or
No,
any of that?
That's true. I did not take him to be angry.
Well, I thought your position was that you couldn't see the facial features of Mr. Oulson because it was too dark.
I told you I could see people.
Is your position that it was too dark and therefore you couldn't see Mr. Oulson's facial features?
I never said that.
Page 35, lines 1.
May we briefly approach?
Yeah.
Ms. Roy, I'm going to direct you back to that deposition that we took on March the 23rd of 2015. Remember that?
I do not.
Okay. Do you remember making...
Your Honor, I would object. She indicated she does not remember.
Okay. Ms. Roy, I'm going to show you a document. I'd like you to read it.
Okay.
Okay? May I put you on? Alistair, you can sit. I'll bring it to you. Starts here on question. Read this right down here.
Okay.
See right here?
Okay.
You read this already?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Do you remember that?
I don't.
You don't remember it at all?
I do not.
Okay. But you would agree that if you made a statement in a
Your
deposition
Honor, I
back...
would object. This is improper.
I'm an overrule.
You would agree that if you made a statement in a deposition back in 2015 under oath, that your recollection of the events would have been much better in 2015 than they are in 2022?
If that's what I remembered then, that's what I remembered then. I don't remember it today.
Well, I realize that, but you would agree that since 2015 is back near the time of the event, your recollection back in 2015 would be a lot better than your recollection in 2022.
Yes.
Now, I think we left off where you indicated to the members of the jury that you did not see Mr. Reeves holding on or bracing himself on the wall when he left,
There was no wall.
right? And then when he came back, you indicated that he came back normally, correct?
Yes.
And he sat down where his wife was, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's when Mr. Oulson stands up and tells him, "You've turned me in," or something to that effect.
Yes. You
Okay.
reported me.
Now, you didn't hear Mr. Reeves respond to that, did you?
I did not.
And you looked over to Mr. Reeves, did you not?
Yes, I was looking in that area.
Because you thought,
I thought that there was going to be an altercation.
and at that point in time, that you thought that somebody was going to punch somebody, right?
Yes.
Okay, and the only thing you had in front of you at this point in time is that you had Mr. Oulson standing up, right?
Yes.
Accusing Mr. Reeves of turning him, correct?
Well, I don't know if he was accusing him, but he mentioned that, yes.
And you didn't hear anything from Mr. Reeves at all?
I did not.
But you thought that a punch was going to be thrown?
Yes.
In fact, you don't even remember, do you, Mr. Reeves having popcorn in his hand, do you?
Yes, I thought Chad Oulson had the popcorn.
Exactly. You didn't think Mr. Reeves had anything in his hand?
That's right.
Now, clearly to you, that tone that Mr. Oulson said, "You turned me in," was a pretty loud tone.
Loud enough for me to hear it.
And certainly loud enough that you wouldn't expect anybody to have that tone in a theater with the movie previews blaring. Right? Because it had to be over the preview, right?
Well, yes, but I don't think that you have to speak that loud to speak over the previews.
Do you know
My
what-
husband was sitting right next to me, and he would talk to me, and I heard him.
Do you know what previews were playing?
I have no idea.
Do you remember RoboCop?
I do not.
You remember all these action shoot 'em up?
I do not. I
Previews?
don't pay attention to the previews.
Okay, and so you're telling this court that you also did not see Mr. Oulson going over the back of his seat towards Mr. Reeves?
He did not.
You didn't see him going over the back of his seat once?
Never.
You didn't see him going over the back of the seat Twice?
If I didn't see him do it once, I certainly didn't
And
see
you
him do it
certainly did-
twice.
and you-
I'd ask that, Mr.
My
Escobar-
apologies for that, Judge. I did jump the gun a little bit. And you didn't see him going over the back of the seat a third time?
I did not.
And you were a mere couple of seats from Mr. Reeves, correct?
That's true.
And you were facing Mr. Oulson
Yes,
in that darkened theater.
yes.
Now, you scooted out of there pretty quickly because your husband was telling you, let's leave, correct?
I think I was there longer than my husband would have wanted me to be there, but I felt frozen. I was shocked.
I understand. And you went to the concession area?
Yes.
Concession lobby area. And in that concession lobby area, there's a bunch of tables and seats.
Yes,
Is that correct? And there was a large group of individuals that were there with you in that concession area, correct?
yes.
And everybody was talking about what had just happened.
I have no idea.
You didn't hear people chattering about what
I
happened?
heard people talking. I have no idea what they were talking about.
Page 45, lines 13 through 20. Remember the deposition that I took of you in
I do not.
2015?
I do not.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. I'm going to ask you if you remember these questions and answers, okay?
Okay.
Your Honor,
Question.
I would ask that the statement be shown to the witness who's already indicated that she does not.
I'll be more than glad to do that, Your Honor. May I approach? That's right. It's going to start right here. And it's going to go down to here.
Oh my goodness, I don't remember this. Okay.
Okay. So you had a chance to take a look at this transcript, correct?
Yes,
And does that refresh your recollection about the fact that individuals out there in that concession area were talking about what happened?
apparently so. I do not remember that at all.
Okay. But you would agree with me that if you made that statement in 2015, that your recollection would have been much better in 2015 than it was in 2022?
Yes,
Ms. Roy, do you remember how long you were in that concession stand with all those people talking?
half an hour, 45 minutes, I don't know.
And you certainly never remember any police officer coming to you and telling you, do not talk to anyone in this group about what you heard or saw. You never-
True.
No police officer came to you, 40, 45 people, whatever the number was, in a concession area, and not one single police officer came to you and said, we're going to separate you, I don't want you to talk to anybody, I don't want you to hear what anybody has to say. That never happened.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I don't remember hearing that there was ever a number of people that was in the concession area. That was just.
Whatever number, Judge, whatever number.
Well, I mean, there's a big difference between 10 and 45.
Miss Roy, how many people do you think were out in the concession area?
I have no idea. I have no idea how many people were in the theater.
Okay. But regardless of you sitting in that concession area, no police officer came to you and said, hey, we're going to separate you, or hey, I don't want you to talk to anybody about what you heard or saw, right? That never
True.
happened. It never happened at all, ever, while you were in that theater, correct?
Correct.
I believe that you indicated on direct examination that you were interviewed by a police officer.
Yes.
And you would agree that that interview was a very, very short interview, correct?
I've never been interviewed by a police officer. I can't tell you if it was long or short.
Hearing 2420. We had a hearing before this very judge back in 2017. You remember the following questions and answers. You had a police officer that interviewed you. You said yes. It's a short interview. You said, I believe so, yes.
Well, that's what I just said. I've never been interviewed by a policeman, so I didn't know if it was long or short.
Well, but you said under oath in 2017 that you believed it was short, correct?
Because I didn't know the difference between a long interview and a short interview.
Let me ask you, in that interview, did this detective ever ask you about any of your disabilities?
No.
Okay. No further questions.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. I know it's been a while, but do you remember if this theater had a Cine Bistro in it, a place where you can eat?
Yes.
And where's that located in reference to where you were sitting? Do you recall?
Oh, the Senate Bistro, that would have been behind us.
Okay, is there a wall or something that separates the
No.
general theater? Let me show you State's Exhibit. Six. May I approach the witness? Looking at State's Exhibit number 6, do you recognize this
Yes, I
photograph?
do.
And what is that a photograph of?
It's the theater. Like, we would have been, wherever the middle is, we would have been right here. And then the Curtis Reeves and his wife would have been here. But there's no wall there.
Okay, this area right here, what is that brown part by it?
That's just, oh, I don't know. Do you call it a wall? I call a wall something that goes straight up. That's just a partition separating the Senate Bistro from this area.
Can I have the witness sit down just for a moment?
Yes.
Oh, stop.
You might go on that side. Can everybody see if I hold this up here? Okay, you indicated you were in which row?
We would have been in this back row, maybe like sitting here, and then there would have been an empty space, and then it would have been Mrs. Reeves and her husband.
Okay, just somewhere in the middle is what you're saying.
Right. And
Okay.
that's the Senate Bistro back there.
I can't
Yeah, those jurors can't see.
See. I know, you have to stay
You'll
right
have
there.
to, she'll have to sit on this, closer to the side.
Okay. You know what we'll do? Maybe we'll do it twice.
Do it again?
Well, now those can't see.
Right, well, I'll do it one time on this side and one time on this side.
Okay, thank you.
Want to move down more?
Just a teeny bit. Okay.
Okay.
So when you were asked the question about whether or not Mr. Reeves had a lien on a wall, what did you take that to mean?
Well, like I know this is a curtain, but that to me would be a wall because it goes straight up.
Okay.
This is just, to me, a divider. So like my husband and I would have been sitting here, there would have been an empty seat, then it would have been Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, and then,
Okay, so but the area behind you, you're terming it as a divider.
yes,
Okay, all right,
yeah, it doesn't look like a wall to me.
okay.
Did everybody see it?
No, well, did you all need to see?
I think they're good.
Okay, so both myself and Mr. Escobar are asking you about difficulties on the left side. Because of those difficulties, do you do anything in particular when something is happening on your left side?
Yes, if I want to look at something, I look directly at it.
Okay, so that's how you compensate, is you turn and you look directly at it.
Yes.
You were asked by Mr. Escobar about having your right ear checked. Did you have any difficulty hearing your husband out of your right ear?
No.
Hearing anything out of your right ear?
No.
You were asked about chattering versus mumbling. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
Okay. The theater as a whole, how would you characterize that? Chattering or mumbling?
Well, you can hear people that are chattering, you know.
Because they're talking to each other.
Yes, throughout
Okay.
the theater.
Mr. Reeves was mumbling
Yes,
because he was talking to himself.
I thought so.
Do you remember when you were asked about the lighting conditions in the theater, if it was pretty dark or muted? Do you remember that exchange with Mr.
Yes.
Escobar? Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
For defense counsel, hearing 2395. Can you read this exchange? It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. In this statement that was referred to by defense counsel, did you in fact answer that it was muted?
Yes.
Okay. So it wasn't as if you were, for the first time today, saying muted. Back then, you said it was muted as well.
Yes, yes,
Okay. And you clearly can read that here.
yes.
You remember being asked questions about whether or not you could hear what people were talking about when everyone was in the general area of the theater after the shooting.
Yes.
All right, for counsel, this is hearing 2419. May I approach the witness? At a prior time, did you also indicate that you didn't hear what they were talking about?
Right.
Okay, and your quote was, "I didn't hear what they said."
Right.
And that's consistent with your testimony today.
Yes.
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you did hear other people talking about it. Did you take other people's statements and make it your own?
No.
You're testifying to what you observed and what you heard.
Yes.
Now, just going back very briefly, when this defendant came back into the theater, he sat down, some time passed, and then you indicated that Mr. Oulson had stood up.
Yeah.
Okay. Was
Well-
everything very quick between that time and the time of the shooting?
No.
Maybe, well, did it take about 5 seconds till then for the shooting to take place?
I've been very lenient with leading, but he's leading this witness throughout.
Okay. I'll reword. Between the time that you saw popcorn in the air and the shooting, how much time was that? Between the popcorn and the shooting?
I'm going to say
Almost,
5 or 6 seconds.
okay, we'll go back to the time of the popcorn.
The popcorn went flying. The popcorn didn't have time to come down, and his arm came up. I saw an arm come up.
Okay, so that's what I want to focus on. Between the time of the popcorn and the shooting, was that a very quick period of time?
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Nothing further, thank you.
Just very briefly, one question. Ms. Roy, I think you indicated in redirect that divider, you're calling it a divider. It's behind your seat, correct? Okay. And so are you telling the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that you never saw Mr. Reeves as he was exiting in front of you and out the theater, that he wasn't holding on or bracing himself on the divider?
I don't believe that wall was high enough for anybody to brace themselves on.
So you didn't see it? You didn't see him doing that?
He didn't do it.
He didn't do it, okay. No further questions.
May this witness be released?
She may be released, but we're going to keep her on standby.
Okay. Ms. Roy, you're free to go for now, but just if you should get a phone call about coming back, you'll need to come back, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we do another witness before lunch? Okay. Jury okay, or do you need a short break? Anybody?
Okay.
Okay. If you need a break, just holler anytime throughout the trial. I've been meaning to remind you that. Just, we can take a break quickly, so. All right, call your next witness, please.
Angela Hamilton?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosenwalter.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. All right, good morning. Can you please state your first and last name and spell them both for the court reporter?
Angela Hamilton, Angela Hamilton.
Okay, and you don't have to tell us exactly where you live, but what city do you live in?
Bushnell.
Let me turn your attention back to January 13th of 2014. Were you working during that period of time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and where were you working?
For the school system.
Okay, and what did you do with the school system?
I was a lab manager.
January 13th of 2014, was that a Monday?
Yes, sir.
The day before, which obviously is a Sunday, were you not feeling very well?
I wasn't.
Because of that, what did you do?
I called in for Monday.
Meaning you called in sick?
Yes, sir.
Now, back January 13th of 2014, and I'm sure it's the same now, who were you living with?
My husband, Alan.
All right, and I don't mean it to sound like somehow there's a divorce or something, but you're still married.
Yes, sir.
All right, and what did he do for a living?
He was a corporal with Sumter County Sheriff's Department.
Had he worked on that Sunday as well?
Yes, sir. He worked Sunday night.
Okay, did he work on Monday?
No.
So you called into work, and did you have Monday off now?
Yes.
Did you and your husband make any plans on that Monday?
Yes, after he came home and slept for a little while.
Okay, because he had worked a late shift.
Yes, sir.
What were the plans that you made?
We planned to go to the movies.
Is there any particular theater that you normally go to?
Sometimes in the villages.
Okay, so is it split between the villages and where?
Wesley Chapel.
Okay,
Grove.
on January 13th, 2014, which theater did you choose to go? Did you choose to go to?
Wesley Chapel.
Any particular reason? What movie were you going to see?
Lone Survivor.
All right, do you recall approximately what time it was that movie was going to start?
Shortly after 1.
When you got to the movies, was it just you and your husband?
Yes, sir.
Did you purchase tickets there?
Yes, sir.
After you purchased the tickets, do you remember if you went to the concession area or not?
We stopped and got drinks.
Okay. Did you then go into the theater?
Yes, sir.
All right. When you walked into the theater, do you remember whether or not the previews were playing yet?
Something was playing, not the movie.
Okay. Let's talk about the lighting conditions when you entered. How would you describe the lighting conditions?
It was still lit.
Okay. Now, when you say lit, were all of the house lights on, meaning it was fully lit?
No, sir.
Okay. Had the actual movie, meaning Lone Survivor, had that started yet?
No, sir.
Okay. So it wasn't dark as if the movie had started.
No, sir.
Right, somewhere in between.
Yes, sir.
When you went into the theater and you turned around to look where you're going to sit, do you and your husband generally sit in a specific area inside a theater?
Yes, sir.
And where is that?
As far back as possible.
Okay. So when you say as far back as possible, meaning if you can in the last row?
Yes, sir.
Did you sit in the last row on this particular day?
Yes, sir.
When you turned around to look at the theater to go to where you were going to sit, could you see seats?
Yes, sir.
Could you see the rows?
Yes, sir.
Could you see the aisle?
Yes, sir.
Could you see people, like actual people sitting in the seats?
Yes, sir.
Could you see what they were doing?
Yes, sir.
May I approach with State's Exhibit number 6?
You may.
Actually, may I have the witness step down?
She may.
Briefly?
Rearrange if you need to.
You're on the
No
bed.
objection?
I don't, but if we can just approach her.
Uh-huh.
please.
No, some of the jurors are having a hard time hearing her. I was going to ask to speak into the mic.
Okay.
Okay.
May I
Thank
have
you.
your position, Your Honor?
Yes,
Thank you.
May I have the witness step down briefly?
you may.
Can everybody see? I'm going to use this fancy pointer I'm going to give you. Okay. Your call where you were in the theater.
Yes, sir.
Just generally speaking, can you show the members of the jury where you were? Okay, so at the back row and then facing, I guess, the Cinebistro area up to the right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, between the time that you sat down and eventually we're going to be talking about a shooting, were the lighting conditions the same?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about the volume. When you sat down, how would you describe the volume of what was on the screen?
I mean, it was playing, but you could still have conversations.
Okay, did you have any difficulty hearing your husband?
No, sir.
Could you hear other people talking?
You could hear conversations. You couldn't hear specifically what they were saying.
Okay, and were you paying attention to specifically what they were saying?
No, sir.
Is that the reason why you didn't know what they were saying?
Yes, sir.
But it was loud enough to hear a conversation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And could you hear conversations and see other people that were 5, 6, 10 seats away?
Yes, sir.
Didn't have any difficulty seeing that?
No, sir.
Now, you indicated your husband was a deputy.
Yes, sir.
Did he have a firearm?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did he bring the firearm into the theater?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you hold it for him?
I did not hold it. He put it in my purse.
Okay. And what was the reason for that?
He just took it out of his holster to lean back and get comfortable.
Now, eventually there was a shooting, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you later on find out the names of the people that were involved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The person that did the shooting, what did you learn his name was?
Curtis Reeves.
And the person that was shot, did you learn his name?
Chad Oulson.
All right. Did you know either of those people before January 13th?
No, no, sir.
Okay. So when we refer to them by name, it's just to make it easy for everyone to follow. You learned that later on.
Yes, sir.
In relation to you, where was the defendant Curtis Reeves sitting? Was he in the same row?
Yes, sir.
And to your right or to your left?
To my right.
Were they more towards the middle?
Yes, sir.
The person that was shot, you indicated that was Chad Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Where was he? Was he also in your row or a different row?
He was in a different row.
Okay, which row was he in?
This row in front of us.
Did you note whether or not there was anyone with Chad Oulson?
There was a female with him.
Did you later learn who she was?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
His wife.
Now, at some point in time while you're sitting in the theater, does something turn your attention to the right? Something that you see or something that you hear?
Something that I see.
Okay. What is it that first brings your attention to your right towards the middle of the theater?
I seen a gentleman get up and walk out.
Okay. And did you later find out who that person was?
Yes, sir.
And who was it?
Mr. Reeves.
Okay. Do you know why he got up and walked out?
No, sir.
Okay. You didn't have any knowledge about what was going on at that point in time?
No, sir.
At some point, did you see Mr. Reeves return?
Yes, sir.
Did you watch him the entire time?
No, sir.
You just know he came back into the theater.
Yes, sir.
After he came back into the theater, did you pay attention to the middle of the theater, or did you watch the previews again?
I went back to watching the previews.
Okay. Did something direct your attention away from the previews?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was that?
The gentleman in front of him stood up.
Okay, so that would be Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
And were you looking at Mr. Oulson, or was it just something that caught your eye?
It was just something that caught my eye.
Okay. And once it caught your eye, did you look in that direction?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear or see anything at that time when you looked over?
Mr. Oulson said something that he was texting his daughter.
Okay. Now, when he said that, which direction was he facing?
The gentleman in the row towards Mr. Reeves.
Okay, so Mr. Oulson was facing Mr. Reeves when you made a comment about texting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you remember if there was, and I'm not going to say the word, but an F word in there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what you heard.
Yes, sir.
After you saw Mr. Oulson stand up, what's the next thing that you see?
Popcorn fly.
Okay. Was that pretty quick after he stood up?
Yes, sir.
When you saw the popcorn fly, what was the next thing you saw?
Immediately after you heard the gunshot and saw the flash.
Okay, so going in an order, you saw Mr. Oulson stand up and face Mr. Reeves, the defendant,
Yes, sir.
said something
Yes,
about
sir.
texting his daughter.
Yes, sir.
Immediately after that, popcorn,
Yes, sir.
and then immediately after that, the shooting.
Yes, sir.
At any time, did you see Mr. Oulson literally climb over into what would be your row?
No, sir.
Did you ever see him taking his fist back and punching the
No.
defendant?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear him threatening, I'm going to kick your butt, and I mean the A word, but I'm not saying it, I'm going to, threats to that extent?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear the defendant yelling and screaming and exclaiming as if he was being attacked?
No, sir.
Did you ever see a life and death struggle occurring before any shot fired?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear the defendant yelling, no, 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 or whoa, 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 or anything like that?
No, sir.
Did you see any objects go flying across the movie theater? Okay, not talking about the popcorn, but any other objects before that?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you ever hear the defendant exclaim anything as if he was hit by an object?
No, sir.
Did you ever see the defendant react as if he was just hit by something and he was incredibly injured?
No, sir.
At the time the shot was fired, do you recall what Chad Oulson's wife Nicole was doing?
She was there, but I don't recall exactly what she was doing.
After Mr. Oulson was shot, did you see what happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's first focus on Mr. Oulson. Did you see what he did?
I did not focus on where exactly he walked to, but he eventually fell to the ground.
Okay. After the shooting, did you look at the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell the jury what you saw him doing.
I walked over there to stand by my husband, and he was leaned back in the chair, rubbing his face and his head and his eyes.
Okay. And did your husband get up?
Yes,
Okay. And when was it in time, approximately, that your husband got up?
immediately when the popcorn flew and the gunshot, he got up and walked over there.
Okay. So after the gunshot is when he went over?
Yes,
All right. Did you have an opportunity to watch a video prior to testifying?
yes,
Okay. And did you see your husband getting up in that video and going over?
yes.
When your husband went over to the defendant, did he take any objects from him?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what that object was?
His gun.
Okay, when you say his gun, the defendant's gun?
Yes, sir.
Right. At some point in time, did your husband give that gun to a sergeant or someone with the sheriff's office?
Yes, sir.
Did you see Mrs. Oulson after that?
I didn't focus in on her. She was still in the theater.
Do you know what she was doing?
I could hear her
What did you-
crying.
Okay. Did there come a point in time when deputies from the sheriff's office arrived?
Yes,
Were you in the theater when that happened?
yes.
Did paramedics come?
Yes, I didn't focus in or see them,
Okay,
but I'm assuming, yes.
all right. Did there come a point in time when you were told to go to a specific area of the theater because there was going to be an investigation?
Yes,
Were you given a blank form? Sometimes people refer to these as written statements.
yes,
Did you fill out a written statement?
yes, sir.
Were you given any instructions on how much or how little to put in there?
No, sir.
Did you just put in the information that you thought was relevant for you?
Yes, sir.
Did there come a point in time on that particular day that a detective interviewed you as well?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to other people about what you observed?
No, sir.
What you're testifying to, is that what you personally heard and what you personally observed?
Yes, sir.
When you gave your statement to the detective, was your husband in the room?
Yes, sir.
Did your husband help you in any way to give that statement?
No, sir.
Did he look at you, give you any funny looks like you're crazy, that's not what happened?
No, sir.
Were you in the room with him when he gave his statement?
No, sir.
Were you happy he was in the room with you?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
Just comfort.
With respect to other patrons in the theater, were they kind of spread out when they were filling out the written statements?
Yes, sir.
Were you paying attention to what other people were saying or doing or anything like that?
No, sir.
We have a moment, Your Honor. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
what I heard you testify to was that you worked for the school system? Is
Yes,
that
sir.
right?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
The public school system.
Yes, sir.
And I guess that you called in sick for Monday?
Yes, sir.
You actually did that via an app on Sunday night.
Yes, sir.
The reason I asked that, because the Monday we're talking about was the Monday you were out sick from school.
Yes, sir.
And the reason I'm asking that, because I want to know if you were suffering from some kind of illness that prevented you from seeing clearly,
No, sir.
okay, or hearing clearly,
No, sir.
or affected you in any way.
No, sir.
Okay, but you called in sick and you were at the theater with your husband.
Yes, sir.
Now, I know you had your husband's gun in your purse,
His gun was in my purse, yes.
and that's because he carries it behind him, right, when he's off duty?
Yes, sir.
Okay, he didn't want to lean on it.
Yes, sir.
Certainly it wasn't in your purse because you have a carry and concealed firearm license,
No, sir.
but your husband did bring his gun to the theater.
Yes, sir.
That's because when he's off duty, that's his habit, that's what he does.
Yes, sir.
One of the things your husband does is that you sat in the rear row of the theater, right?
Yes, sir.
And what your husband does, because he's an off-duty police officer, because he's trained law enforcement, when you go to restaurants, he likes to sit in the back so he can see everything.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's kind of his habit, and now, by marriage, your habit as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you got to the theater, it was dark, but not as dark as when the movies are playing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you sat down, the previews were actually playing.
Previews or advertisements. Yes, sir.
And you were there when the sign came on, please turn off your cell phones.
Yes, sir.
Now, while you were there watching the previews, you heard a person talking to another person that distracted you, right?
Yes, sir.
And that person was, we came to know him as Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
And the voice was loud. That person was raising his voice, right?
He was louder than a normal conversation. Yes, sir.
Well, the previews were loud, right?
You could still have conversations, but yes.
But you could hear Mr. Oulson's voice over the previews.
He was closer to, yes, sir.
And what you heard Mr. Oulson say is something to the effect of, I am texting my effing daughter.
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Oulson's voice was raised. We've already agreed with that, right?
It was louder than normal, yes.
Well, it wasn't a normal speaking voice.
No, sir.
I mean, could you agree with me when somebody usually uses the F word while talking to somebody else, it's usually somebody who's agitated, right?
Yes, sir.
And so in this case, the voice was raised, right?
Louder than normal, yes, sir.
And it was agitated.
Yes, sir.
You only heard one voice. You only heard Mr. Oulson's voice.
Yes, sir.
You didn't hear Mr. Reeves.
No, sir.
And when you first, that voice caught your attention, you looked to your right, right?
Yes, sir.
And you saw a tall man standing.
Oh, yes, sir.
Right, and that turned out to be Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Now, that tall man was standing, and he was facing Mr. Reeves.
Yes, sir.
So this man was agitated and angry, right?
Agitated, yes.
Okay. He was using the F word,
Yes, sir.
and he was in a movie theater, but with his back towards the movie screen,
Yes, sir.
standing up, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, there was a woman next to Mr. Oulson that later became known to you as Mrs. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Now, you remember that Mrs. Oulson was not looking at the movie screen, but instead was looking at her husband, Mr. Oulson, right?
Yes, sir.
And this tall man wasn't just standing up, he was actually leaning towards the man in the back row.
He was leaning forward.
Okay, so he wasn't just standing straight up and down.
He was standing straight up and leaning forward slightly, yes.
Okay. When you saw this, you became alarmed.
Yes, sir.
When you saw what you saw and you heard what you heard, you became so alarmed that you actually nudged your husband,
Yes, sir.
the off-duty deputy, to get his attention because you were concerned about what was going on.
I could tell that there was people talking, so I nudged his to get his attention that direction. Yes.
And you heard another statement by Mr. Oulson, right? You heard a statement to the effect of, a statement that contained the words, "a rude old man."
Yes, sir.
And that was raised and agitated as well.
If I wrote it in there, I'd.
Now, you told the prosecutor that you really didn't know what Mrs. Oulson was doing, but you told me, you know, number one, that she was looking at her husband.
She was in next to him. Yes.
But I mean, looking at him as opposed to facing the movie screen, not paying attention to him. I mean, she was looking at him, watching what he's doing, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you got the impression that Mrs. Oulson was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave,
I kind of got that impression. Yes.
like pulling him to get out of there, right?
I don't know that I ever seen her pulling him, but I just got the impression that they were going to go sit somewhere else.
And it was Mrs. Oulson that was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave.
I just assumed that they were going to go sit somewhere else.
And when you say assume, you know, in this sort of arena, it's a dangerous thing, right?
I'm sorry.
So let's talk about what you saw. Number one, we already know you saw Mr. Oulson standing up, leaning slightly into the rope.
Objection, answered.
I haven't, okay. Leaning forward, agitated, loud, making at least two statements, one with the F-bomb. Mrs. Oulson was looking at him. Tell me physically what you saw that made you assume that they were going to leave, or that Mrs. Oulson was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave?
When she started standing up,
Okay. So she seemed to you like she was trying to coax him out of there?
that they were going to leave.
Okay. Now you hear Mr. Oulson, you hear Mr. Reeves exclaim, "You're not going to do this," then the gun goes off, right?
Yes, sir.
After it's over, you go with your husband to where Mr. Reeves is. He has the gun on his leg, right?
I didn't initially walk over where my husband was.
Okay, you waited until your husband got over there and made sure everything was safe.
I tried to call 911, but I had no service. So when I couldn't get through to 911, I walked over to where he was.
Okay, and so afterwards, Mr. Reeves expresses that he hopes that Mr. Oulson's going to be all right, right?
Yes.
You didn't hear Mr. Reeves say anything about popcorn, right?
About what?
Throwing popcorn or anything like that. Mr. Reeves never said that.
Not right now that I remember hearing.
Okay. And you certainly didn't write in your statement, right?
Okay.
You didn't give it in the interview. So, I mean, at this point as you're sitting here, do you remember somehow that Mr. Reeves said that?
No, sir.
Okay. Because he didn't say that, right?
I don't know if he did or not.
You were standing very close to him after this happened, right? Within a few seats, you could hear what everybody was saying, right?
There was a lot going on and people moving and just looking at other stuff.
Okay. But you heard Mr. Reeves talk about,
Objection, hearsay.
Response? You want to approach?
sure. Mr. Reeves expressed concern for Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
But at no time did you hear Mr. Reeves utter the words, "throw popcorn at me," right?
No, sir.
Or anything having to do with the word popcorn in it, period.
Not that I heard him say no.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect?
Yes, sir, I may have a moment just to find something.
You may.
Were you sitting right next to this defendant?
No, sir.
Right, were there people between you and this defendant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At the time of the shooting, were you where the defendant was, or were you in your seat?
In my seat.
Okay. Who went over to the defendant first?
My husband.
And that was after the shooting.
Yes, sir.
Did you go behind your husband at some point?
Yes, sir.
And had the shooting been over already?
Yes, sir.
So it's possible that you may not have heard what the defendant stated immediately after the shooting.
Yes, sir.
You were asked questions about Mr. Oulson standing and then leaning.
Yes, sir.
Was his entire body, meaning really his whole body, leaning over as if to attack the defendant?
No, sir.
Then you testified on cross-examination that he was standing, but he was just kind of leaning.
Yes, sir.
Okay, would that be, I mean, the way that I just moved, would that be an example of just leaning?
Yes, sir.
Now, do you recall why it was that you thought they were leaving the theater?
I don't recall. I just,
Would it refresh your memory if I showed you a previous statement? May I approach the witness? Yes, it's, I think it's the deposition, page 26.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't.
Lines, it's like 17 to the end of the page.
Your Honor, I didn't hear the question. I apologize.
If she recalled why it was that she felt as though they were leaving. May I approach the witness?
What was her answer? She did not recall?
Correct, and then I asked if it would refresh her memory if she looked at a statement. If you could read this is page 26, just read the entire block. See if that refreshes your memory about why you believe that they were leaving the theater. Does that refresh your memory?
yes, sir.
Okay, so what was it about Nicole Oulson that led you to believe that they were possibly going to leave the theater?
She had her purse.
Okay, so in other words, you didn't see her standing in front of Chad and waving and screaming. It was because you believe she had her purse with her.
Yes.
And I think you testified to this with Mr. Michaels. You were making an assumption.
Yes.
Okay, so you don't know for sure. That's just what you're guessing, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank
May I just follow up?
Go ahead.
All right. Now, Mr. Rosenwasser bent a little bit at the waist and asked you if you know, that's how far Mr. Oulson was over, right?
Yes, sir.
When you're talking about distance, are you talking about somebody that's Mr. Rosenwasser's height, my height, or Mr. Oulson's height?
I don't remember exactly how tall he was. I just know he was taller than his wife.
Okay. Now, the prosecutor talked to you about a prior statement you made, which was a deposition you gave, remember?
Yes, sir.
And you got to read that page that he showed you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you told us that Mrs. Oulson had her purse on her shoulder, right?
I don't remember it to this day, but if that's what the statement says,
Well, do you need your recollection refreshed? Would it help you to read it?
I read it.
Okay. So you remember you said that? It was
Yes,
on her
sir.
shoulder? Excuse me?
Was it in her hand or on her shoulder?
Here, let me let you look at this again. Sounds like you're a little confused. Page 26. Same page. May I approach, Your Honor? All right. It's towards that bottom part.
It was on her shoulder.
Okay. So your testimony then was it was on her shoulder.
Yes, sir.
And in terms of her hands, you don't know where they were.
No, sir.
So you don't know if they were trying to hold him back, right?
I did not see. I feel it. I did not see her holding him back.
Well, you don't know where her hands were, though. Do you?
I could see him though,
Okay.
and
Do
I
you know
didn't.
if her hands were around his waist?
No, sir.
Do you know if her hand was reaching up, tapping him?
Check, this is beyond the scope.
I'll overrule.
Did you see her hand reaching up, tapping him? Her left hand?
No, sir.
No further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further? You may.
I just ask a few questions based on Mr. Michaels' questions.
Okay.
You indicated that you did have an opportunity to see Mr. Oulson standing
Yes.
and popcorn flying and then the shot.
Yes, sir.
Objection leading.
Did you see at any point Nicole Oulson in front of Chad Oulson?
No, sir.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
She is on standby but may be released.
Okay. Ms. Hamilton, you're free to go, but if you get a call to come back, I need you to come back, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a perfect time for a lunch break. Remember my instructions during the recess: no research, no talking about the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You can leave your notes in your seat. And again, if you're going